No one knows everything, but everyone knows something no one else knows, including you. Welcome to the other side of things. I'm your host, Dr. Michael DeMaria, and for 35 years I've been a guide of the soul. On the other side of things, we explore alternative perspectives on challenging topics, ranging from love, sex, death, and madness to dream work, breath work, and other cutting-edge healing modalities. We live on a precipice as a species, so let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Things. Today on The Other Side of Things, I'm joined by my dear friend Sharalee Hoelscher. Sharalee trained as a certified advanced Rolfer with some of the very few advanced faculty members at the actual Dr. Ida Rolf Institute. She's also a registered cranial sacral therapist and has been a full-time body worker in private practice for over 3 decades, and also has a BA in psychology. And although she has actually just recently retired, I am very fortunate because not only is Shirley a gifted Rolfer, but someone who's also opened my eyes to the deeper roots of Ida Rolf's vision. That gravity itself is the true therapist, and that the connective tissue system is the living fabric through which healing and alignment unfold. When I was doing my full sessions with her, she also introduced me to the groundbreaking work of embryologist Eric Blechschmidt. I kept seeing his book on ontogenesis, and we'll get into that, on her shelf, and it so fascinated me, and I was so moved by the work, I immediately went and bought this book. And his insights remind us that human form arises not just from genes, but from the dynamic movements of life itself, a process he calls ontogenesis, which also is the term for literally bringing into being, the origin of being, how being arises. And in embryology, that's how literally we come to be in the womb. And that it doesn't happen just in the prenatal period in our mother's womb, but continues throughout our lifespan. Our conversation today is going to explore how these streams of wisdom, Rolfing, the connective tissue system, embryology, and our relationship with gravity can guide us into wholeness and transformation in a time on the planet when we really need it most. Shirley, it's great to have you here. Thanks for making the time to be here.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm just so honored to be invited, and it was such a privilege working with you.
Well, I feel the same. And actually, that's a great place to begin. I'd love to begin by sharing that I had this honor and privilege of going through the full Rolfing series with you, something we had talked about doing and something I'd wanted to do even before meeting you, ever since I first heard about her work and got her book and read it, decades ago. And yet, as life will have it, we just, we didn't find the time to make it work. And then when it finally did, it was perfect timing. And it was such a profound boost to my health and my wellness and my healing, and you were able to begin to understand too the autobiography of literally my connective tissue system also was very affected by some childhood surgeries, and my work with you is as powerful, if not much more so, than any other therapy I had done. And I felt more than body work. It was like a process of becoming more myself in working with you. So I thought a good place to begin would be for listeners who may not know about Rolfing. If you could begin by sharing what Rolfing is at its heart and how you were drawn to this work.
Oh, gosh. Rolfing does bring the person more into their authentic selves. And it's fascinating how that unfolds in a person. You might think of the work as physical, but it's very hard to separate out the physical with the mental, emotional, spiritual. We are truly whole beings.
Hmm.
I was first drawn to Rolfing as a young adult. When I received the work, I'd had an interest in holistic therapies and knew I wanted to do something in that capacity. about the only natural and more holistic work that I knew of at the time was chiropractic, but I wasn't 100% sold on that as being my path. But when I discovered Rolfing, I was so amazed for several reasons. First of all, the work is very long lasting, the results are. So I thought, well, if I truly make a change for this individual that lasts a long time and they don't have to come back to me repeatedly for the rest of my career, then I've actually helped them.
Absolutely. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yes.
But the results of Rolfing for me personally and for many people that I've worked with are just incredibly profound. And it does make a change, not just in how the person moves and in their overall health, but can ripple out into changes throughout all of their life through mental, emotional, spiritual, their life direction, how they relate to themselves, how they relate to others, how they are in the world. So it was something that drew me because I wanted to do something that was deeply meaningful and made a real difference for people.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you know, I also wanted to mention, you know, I referred people to you, you know, for many years, and in fact, some people we had in common, and I was always so amazed at the changes I saw in them, and it was one of the reasons I wanted to as well. And I shared with you, you know, that after my surgeries, which, you know, not only didn't I get probiotics after being pumped up with antibiotics, but also it was in the I had some, you know, abdominal surgery, which really messed with my core connective tissue system in the abdomen and how it was connected, particularly to my hip flexors, the psoas, the iliacus, all of that. And that when I read Ida and then you reinforced this, you know, literally my body system, I was I was bent in on myself. And I, you know, I've always thought of myself as I was painfully shy as a child, but I wonder how much of that was also as a result of what was happening in my body and how those bodily changes and these tightnesses and these places of trapped energy was then affecting my psyche, was affecting my mind, and affecting my sense of self. And that was so amazing as that kind of unwound working with you. And yes, I really loved when you also would discuss and talk about, it was so different than any kind of massage therapy, because I could tell you were working with not only gravity, but my whole being. And that you would suggest is like the movements you did, and I hesitate to even call them manipulations. I'm sure you have a different word for them, but that suggesting or opening or inviting the body to move or unwind or realign itself. And it makes me think of Ida's comment that I remember hearing this phrase. You mentioned it a number of times in work together. And I literally got chill bumps when I heard it, but that gravity is the therapist. And to me, that was just such a radical and yet poetic idea. And that this very force that makes life on earth possible is also the primary healing force. And of course, in some ways that makes perfect sense. But I think for a lot of people, it's lost on them. They don't know what we're talking about. So I was wondering if you could share how you understand that phrase today and how you see it alive in your life and while you were practicing, and anything else you might want to say about this very, very deep and yet very practical and fundamental truth.
Well, such a deep and broad question, and I love it. Yes, gravity as the therapist was something Ida Rolf reiterated time and time again in her teachings. And There's a couple of simplistic ways of looking at that. You can look at gravity as the therapist in how the person physically moves. And you can also look at gravity as the therapist in how they relate to the world and to themselves. And I touched on this earlier. So we'll start with how the body moves. And I love that you chose the word invite, because when I contact someone's system, it is more of an invitation of offering a possibility and inviting the body itself or the person's whole being to either accept that invitation or choose not to. So there's no forcing the body into any particular way of being or pushing tissue into a place that might be my concept of what is great, but overall doesn't serve the person as well as when the body makes its own choice.
Mm.
And so I just simply open up doors and say to the body, would you like to try this on? And most of the time, there's this little moment of, huh. And then the body moves right into it, and things open up and move so much more dynamically and in balance. And the result of that is when the person is upright in gravity and moving, the body is very efficient. Movement and staying upright becomes very easy, a lot less work, and um, more, the person moves in a coordinated way with ease and strength.
Mm.
To give you an example of how that is healing for the body, there was a gentleman that I worked with one time who had a shoulder issue, and it was a partial tear in a tendon, and he was lined up for surgery and was hoping he could avoid the surgery. So by simply repositioning his body so that his arm hung differently, it did not put so much weight and drag on that tendon, and the tendon had the opportunity to heal,
Mm.
which it did do. And then he was able to avoid the surgery. So then we come to the psyche or the mind or the emotions or the spirit or all of that wound together. And I loved your example that you gave of being folded in on yourself.
Mm.
I wrote an article one time about this topic, and the example I used was a person who perhaps sat in front of their computer all day in a very hunched position, or maybe they had a slumped over position from years of being abused,
Mm.
and they were avoiding the physical blows that came their way or trying to be unnoticed by the perpetrator. So when a person who is slumped over in that way is does it for many years, the tissue along the front line of the body gets so short that they are unable to stand up or
Mm.
sit up straight. So as I bring the front and the back of the body into balance, and the person then is able to move in a more move around their center of gravity, which
Mm.
is what Rolfing gets the body doing, then they can stand up straight. And the example I gave in this article was what happens to that individual if you just simply intervene on this physical realm. And now they're able and they do sit up and stand up straight. What does that do to their psyche? How do they
Mm.
perceive themselves? How does the world perceive them? The person who's slumped over, it's hard for people to imagine that that individual might have good self esteem. They might be shy. They might be lacking in confidence. It's hard to envision them as a strong leader. But when they're able to be more upright and carry themselves in a way that exhibits confidence, then they possibly would start to become more confident. They can look other people in the eye as more of an equal rather than a subordinate or a submissively. They can look straight ahead down the path of life where they're going, and they might make changes in their life's direction or their career or their relationships. All kinds of things can unfold from these kinds of changes.
It's beautiful. That's so beautiful. And I can so relate. One of the things I love about the sessions was the walking, before and after the sessions. And, as a very holistic, integrative, particularly, phenomenological, Jungian, existential background in my psychology, I think I shared this with you that actually not looking at the biodynamics from a Rolfing standpoint, although they overlap, absolutely. But often if I had somebody who was, let's say, very depressed, and I sometimes would ask them just to walk across the room, and you could see the depression in the walk is kind of what you were even getting at. And then one of my approaches was simply to say, okay, I want you to walk across the room again, but differently. I don't care how differently, but I want you to try to walk differently. And they always would give me this quizzical look, and how people can be so attached to, I almost think of it as like our typical way we hold our bodies and we move is a trance of sorts, right? If it's not reflected on and we don't explore it, or somebody's not mirroring it to us, we can notice that. And so my work with you, it was really interesting. Here I, feel like I, worked on having some decent posture in my life, but not very reflectively, not deeply reflectively. And you, one of the, as simple as, Michael, look at this picture straight ahead of you. Let's see if you can have your eyes on the horizon. You were just, even though it wasn't radical, but I'd have my eyes downward, which then shifted my whole body. And what I loved about it was, like, even for me now, just walking has become a whole different experience. That I'm a skier, and which is a beautiful thing. But now I get, and you even said this, I think you used the word, but when we're really aligned biodynamically with gravity and not fighting gravity, but in that alignment with gravity, that energy is flowing through us, we should be gliding. Our walk should be more of a glide. And when I watch you walk, you're very much that way. It's kind of like, and then, the other thing is just watching other people walk now. I'm even that much more aware, and how, and I think Ida has some diagrams of this, as where just even that little bit of movement, as we get older, just the thoracic upper spine begins to, move down, and the head's tilting over, and what happens as far as just literally practically the physics of that head going forward, moves I can't remember if it's like 8 pounds, 10 pounds, what a typical head is, but all of a sudden it like triples or quadruples in weight. And people think they're just getting old, when literally it's physics. And so it makes me, I guess, to this place of biodynamic. And you it's another word that you've used. And I don't know if you could share a little bit about whatever. I know I shared a lot, but anything that, understanding how this biodynamics plays into us, and our, maybe these kind of, we could say almost biodynamic trances or stuckness, and how to move out of that. And of course, Rolfing is one of the most powerful ways to make that happen.
Well, first, don't want to confuse Rolfing and craniosacral therapy. I am a biodynamic craniosacral therapist.
Right. Right.
So it's a certain approach to craniosacral therapy. But if you apply biodynamic to movement or to Rolfing, it's basically, I would interpret that as restoring our original way of moving, how we're actually designed to move. And Dr. Rolf believed pure physics that if a moving object moves around its center of gravity,
Mm,
that's how it's designed. A ball rolls around a point. We are not a ball, we are long. So we have a center of gravity that's more or less a line from the ground to the sky. And when we are organized and moving well around that center of gravity, it is poetry in
mm,
motion.
mm.
I love your description of gliding. That's that can be what it feels like, and it can feel so effortless. It can feel like such ease. And when any part of the body gets off that center line of gravity, it adds weight, just as if you hold a heavy object far out away from your center. It feels heavier than it does if you hug it close to you. It's the same thing. You gave the example of the forward head carriage, and it's something else in the body has to compensate for that to keep your head from landing on the sidewalk in front of you.
Yes. Yes. So is this what you call the midline? That center is that the appropriate term? And thank you for clarifying that the biodynamic is primarily out of the cranial sacral work, but that there is that overlap. But when we talk about the midline, is this that central line alignment we're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. Some people think it's the spine, but it's it the spine when viewed from the side makes this lovely S forward, back, forward, back, forward, back as you go from the cranium to the coccyx or the head to the tailbone. So the spine itself is not straight, it's not supposed to be straight, but the line of gravity that we move around lies sometimes slightly in front of the spine, and we just organize and move around it from head to toe.
That's
When we
beautiful.
are moving in the way we're designed to move, which
Beautiful.
Rolfing does help to restore.
That's beautiful. So moving on, I know the other one of the great intuitions Ida had was the critical role of the connective tissue system. Long before modern science began to confirm it, which we hear so much more about in the more reductive term, I guess, fascia, because, I want you to enlighten us and our listeners around what the connective tissue system is. And as my rudimentary understanding is that it is this continuous web connecting everything in the body. I'd like to think of this inner wetsuit, it's kind of this image that often comes to me. But Ida was speaking about this decades ago, and I would love for you to share for our listeners what the connective tissue system is, particularly for you, and maybe not just anatomically, which we hear about, but experientially, and why it's so important for our health and wholeness.
Oh, lovely. So we'll start anatomically because I think uh, when you get a concept of that, then we can talk about experientially. So it seems to be an easy way to teach children when they're young about their bodies by saying that the skeleton is a frame and we hang off that frame. I have never in my life seen a skeleton walk into the room. The skeleton is a collection of parts, it's separate bones, and they don't connect to one another on their own. We are basically a collection of parts, muscles, bones, organs, blood vessels, etc., with the exception of this connective tissue system and the skin. So you could think of the connective tissue system as an inner skin that is just as continuous on the inside as our skin is continuous on the outside.
Hmm.
Interestingly enough, this system of tissue um, is what the pieces and parts are embedded into.
Hmm.
So, for instance, if you want to take muscles as example, in this connective tissue system, there are sleeves of tissue that muscle fibers are packed into. at the end of those sleeves, there is a ropey-like um, structure that is continuous with that sleeve. That ropey-like structure is named tendon. The sleeve itself is named fascia, but they are not separate. They are one continuous part of this connective tissue system. It just seems so odd to me that the different areas of this system acquire different names. It would be as strange as if we named the skin on our nose something different than the skin on the bottom of our feet.
That's a great example. That's a great example.
Yes, it's still one continuous thing from head to toe. So there's a lot of talk about fascia today, but fascia is not a separate part. It is an area of this connective tissue system. And to oversimplify it, if you think of bubble wrap, it's two sheets of plastic that are glued together everywhere except where there's a bubble. Imagine that inside each of those bubbles, there is an organ or a bone or a joint or a muscle or the brain or a section of the brain. Um, this is what the connective tissue system is from head to toe. So it gives Dr. Rolf, Dr. Ida Rolf viewed this system as an actual vital organ. An organ has a function, and a vital organ is an organ that we cannot live without. If you removed the heart, the body would cease to live. If you removed other organs in the body, some of them you can live without, some of them you cannot. So she viewed the connective tissue system as a vital organ. And indeed, if we could grab a hold of that system at the top of our head and yank it out of the body, like the old tablecloth trick where you yank the tablecloth out from under the dishes, the body would collapse to the floor in a pile of parts because there would be nothing to give it organization, support, movement, being upright in gravity. We'd be a pile of parts on the floor. So experientially, as a person moves, if they're very attuned to their body, they can feel where they're in balance and where they are out of balance with gravity. And again, coming back to gravity being the key to it all. Experientially, some people feel physical shortening somewhere in their connective tissue system, or tissue feels stuck and unable to move in the way it should be able to move. But when it's all as it should be and it's functioning, it is just, how do I characterize it? A person feels lighter. They feel less effort in any task that they're doing, whether it's sitting, standing, walking, playing their sport, doing their work, lifting a heavy object, carrying a child. Anything they happen to be doing seems easy and effortless, and they tend to not notice their bodies in the same way that they would notice problems, pain, discomfort, restrictions. Is this answering the question?
Yes, no, it's a beautiful answer. And immediately reminds me of there was a number of times when you would get or find a place of stuckness in my connective tissue system, and you roll up a sheet, or you get a sheet. Well, these two pieces of the sheet are, they're not going to, no matter how much you massage here, we're needing to unwrap or allow this, the sheet of this connective tissue to just find its natural, it's stuck. I remember you saying my psoas and iliacus were like stuck together, at one point, and we did opening that. It's been a shift for me ever since. And so I'm really glad you brought in the experiential piece. And I think that, part of what's happening is this sense of inviting not just the body, but the person itself into this experience of this living connective tissue system, and it is a system. And I think it's such a, kind of a great segue into the idea of embryology and Schmidt and this idea of ontogenesis. I'm just, I think I shared with you, I was a philosophy and psychology as an undergraduate, and the area of philosophy I'm still obsessed with is ontology, which is the study of being, and why is there anything instead of nothing, and how does being come into being, and what is being and what is non-being, and of course, we can look at that on a cosmic basis, but it's also on an individual basis is how we each come to be in our mother's womb prenatally before birth. And there's, and then there was, the original belief that ontogenesis, which is how we evolve in the womb, mirrors phylogenesis, which is how all the species evolved in the planet. And it used to be believed it was a one-on-one correspondence, but now we realize it's not exact. But that is, at some level, we're going through, it's almost like the fetus is recalling all of the morphogenic changes that all life on the planet has evolved through. When I saw in your book, The Ontogenetic Basis of Human Anatomy, a biodynamic approach to development from conception to birth, I got chill bumps, and I was like, what is that book? And you said, well, most people, it's, it's pretty heavy, and, but it's like one of the main, for me, it's been so important. And you had it, I love that you had your favorite books were facing outward. They weren't just on the shelf, like, this way. So it was kind of like, you could tell these were, and I think you had one with Jung too. And I was really moved because I'm kind of the same. It's like the books speak to me, and these books are treasure troves of wisdom. And in that book, because I went ahead and got it, which I think you were like, no, you're not really going to buy that book, are you? It's like, you've already read Ida stuff, but it's just an obsession of mine. But in the book, he argues human form arises not simply from genetic instructions, but from this dynamic movements within a holistic field. I studied Rupert Sheldrake and his idea of morphic resonance, so that there are these streams of shaping that are the forces in the embryo, and that it's not just, and it was interesting to me, and this was a good segue, is I always imagined, and I think there are still a lot of, traditional classical biologists who believe this or see this, but now we know this isn't true, is that somehow all the organs develop and then the connective tissue kind of goes around it. But the point he makes is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that system is actually first, or one of the first systems, and that organs and other things start to form out of that. And that was like a figure ground shift for me. And the idea that this kind of, these morphic fields or these shaping forces that are shaping us don't stop when we're born, but continue throughout the life process, which is part of the way we could say why Rolfing can be so radical. And I certainly experienced that with you, is that there is something, and I don't know if I'm probably going way too far afield here, but whether there's a quantum, well, there is a quantum basis of biology, however we, that we go, we're just starting to learn how mitochondria and how the DNA and all these things. But I think at a more basic level, these embryonic movements that continue. So I know I packed a lot of stuff into that, but I'd like to bring it to the practical. Is how do you see this insight resonating with Rolfing and your own approach to body work?
Okay, so I'm going to back into this.
Okay, great.
So we've already talked about a lot about Rolfing, and we've touched on how gravity is the therapist, which is Dr. Rolf's belief. So I'm going to start there. And gravity is the therapist, because remember the example I gave earlier of the gentleman who had the partially torn tendon in his shoulder?
Yes.
And once his not just his alignment, but more specifically his movement was organized around the center of gravity, then the tendon had the opportunity to heal. So I didn't heal the tendon. And it was gravity that did that, because gravity allowed the arm to hang and move around the center of gravity,
Mm.
the arm, the shoulder, so that the healing could happen. So, making a big, big jump into embryology, how we form in the womb. What actually is first, what precedes structure, which seems so counterintuitive, is movement.
Mm.
And people look so confused about that concept. How can there be movement when there's no structure there to move? But it's the movement that creates the structure. And the perfect example of that, according to Blechschmidt's studies, which were in the 1940s, so much predated what Rupert Sheldrake is um, is all about. Um, he identified different movements that happened in the embryo, different actual force fields, if you will, remembering that the embryo is floating in fluid in a rather, not completely weightless, but it is not very subject to the forces of gravity as it's developing inside the womb, in the same way that we are once we are not floating in that fluid and we are having to support ourselves in gravity. So these different force fields are things like pushing and pulling, contraction and expansion. There's, I don't recall if it's 8 or 9 different forces that are happening. And when I say movement precedes structure, the heart develops, the different chambers of the heart and the vessels develop because of the movement of the blood itself in the embryo.
Mm.
And the blood cells start to line up along this course of movement in the embryo that happens in these different fields where there's pressure, and then there's pulling, and then there's curling up, and there's unfurling, and all these different movements happen as certain parts of the embryo receive more nourishment because they're closer to where the nourishment is coming from. Other parts of the embryo may be growing faster. So if you have um, an embryo which is it starts dividing, the fertilized egg divides from, turns into 2 cells and then 4, and then the cells multiply, and then they organize themselves into 2 layers, and then ultimately a third layer arises. And it's in that in those layerings that happen where at one point in the development there is one layer that is growing extremely rapidly. That's actually the nervous system layer. The nervous system and skin arise out of the same layer, and they are arising very, very rapidly. The cells are multiplying because they're getting fed so much faster than these inner cells. I say inner, they're going to become inner. So this layer is getting larger and larger and larger, and it exerts a pulling on this other layer that then the whole embryo folds in on itself. And then later, when the tissues that form that other layer start to get fed, then it opens back up in the other direction. And so there's all of these different forces that happen, that it's the movement
Mm.
of these different layers and these different cells and different tissues that create structure. It's fascinating to me how the muscles develop as the arm buds and the leg buds in the torso start to emerge, and they sort of unfurl, much the way you might see a plant unfurl a leaf, or when it first comes, the first little baby shoot comes up out of the ground and it's curled up and it starts to unfold and turn its face to the sun. And and so the arm buds and the leg buds do this and drag these tissues along with them. And it's the direction of movement that creates different musculature that allows an arm or a leg to extend or contract or rotate in a certain direction. So, and I don't remember what the other part of your question is. It had something to do with how we end up, how this plays out in our adult life. What was that question that you had
So
about
yeah,
that?
that was so beautifully articulated, and thank you, because you have such a, you can just tell you have such a deep understanding of it. I remember you sharing some of that when we were, before I read the book even, and just such a, you have such an embodied understanding, number one. Number two, the sense, you have such a sense of awe and wonder about it, which I love, which I do too. And the other part of the question was, you were going right there, which was because, how that informs both your work with people throughout the lifespan, but also in the way you see it continuing to inform not just your work, but our day to day, our continued evolution as embodied beings. This is something that doesn't stop. And I guess that to me was such a profound, particularly as we age, and that my mid 60s now, and that the sense in which that capacity of movement preceding structure continues. And that's why you can suggest to the body, remind the body of,
Absolutely.
and so, yeah, so anything you want to say about that practically, both in your work, but also maybe for all of us adults, that how might we, like for me, I've done Qigong for decades, and I have actually a particular form of improvisational, more spontaneous forms of Qigong, Jifa Gong, that I like to practice, and also breath work. And, and there's the whole thing called unwinding, which is kind of trying to tune into the midline, but then allow your body to see where it wants to go. But that would spontaneously happen on your table.
Yes, yes. Because the gravity, I mean, because the body is always seeking what is called homeostasis, which is balanced health. The body always balances itself out. If, as I said earlier, if there's a forward head carriage, something else in the body has to compensate by getting behind the line of gravity. The body is incredibly adaptable, as I'm sure you would say the psyche is. Uh, Anything that's out of balance, it will find a way to adapt. Those things typically arise beneath our awareness. So people come in and they wonder, how did I get to this place? Nothing really happened. Why am I this way or that way? Well, the body made choices. First, I have to stay upright. And then, how can I do it with less pain or less work? And when something gets out of balance, it finds a way to deal with that and compensate for it. This goes on throughout our lives. So if somebody wants to explore how that plays out in their own body, they might simply do something like explore, okay, what happens if I do move my head in a different way, or I put my shoulders in a different place? What happens if I just simply, instead of trying to make my posture something, by using my shoulders or tightening up my abdomen or whatever strategy that person has been told or imagined might be useful to have good posture. What happens if I just allow my body to stand itself up?
Mm.
And the body will just simply stand itself up without us having to overlay with these big frontal lobes of our brain this idea, oh, I have to be in this certain position, or I'm not straight, or I'm slumping. And shocking to some people, when they get a side view of themselves, they aren't slumping at all. So if the person can just simply explore, how what happens if I move a little bit differently? When I'm walking, what if I allowed my weight to just shift just a hair forward? Would gravity then carry me along and I propel me forward? And would I catch myself from falling on my face with my next step forward rather than leaning back on my heels and pulling myself along with my legs and getting a low backache? There's so many different little nuanced movement explorations that a person can do. And they can be even more profound if you add weight. So, one of the things I sometimes would do with a person is have them sit or stand, and I would just simply press down on their shoulders and have them move different segments of their body, like their pelvis or their rib cage or their low back or their shoulders, move them in different ways until they can find the most effective way to support that extra weight. And when they find that, they are truly on their center of gravity in that moment.
Mm. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. It reminds me, I think I've shared with you, another profound book for me was Life on Land by Emily Conrad, who developed Continuum, right? And I know she was I don't know if she was an official student of Ida Rolf, but she was certainly influenced by her work. And for me, I think so much of when we're talking about this, particularly from an embryological standpoint, is we are talking about this fluid system too. And I love that just you made it very practical, and it doesn't have to be big or huge, but just listening. And for me, just this awareness of from sitting, standing, walking, being in the car, also when I lie down, whether on the yoga mat or at bedtime, for me there is an awareness that gravity is with me, and that I am swimming in gravity, that gravity is the ocean we swim in. And it's kind of like a fish, the old story of, the old fish comes by the two little fish. It's like, hey boys, how's the water? And they both look at each other. He swims on, and they say, what's water? And I think that's, working with you and reading more deeply about Ida Rolf and ontogenesis and the fluid system. One of the great gifts is I'm aware of the ocean I'm swimming in, of gravity. And I think that brings us to this other beautiful spot, which we also have touched on, that there's a thread between Ida's vision, the connective tissue system, and Blechschmidt's embryology. And that is that the body is not a fixed structure, but a living, ever unfolding process. And it's moving out of this classical view that we are machines and clockworks, that our entire medical system, our entire modern science has been focused on, and it's how damaging it is to treat ourselves and each other like machines. And in philosophy, call it parts extra parts, which is just billiard balls or again, machines. And again, we have a lot of people questioning that materialistic, scientistic, I like to say scientism, not science, the religion of materialism, of reductionism, to the machine model. And now we have the computer model, but they are still not seeing this deeper understanding of life itself and our bodies as process. ever unfolding process. So I'd love to hear anything you'd like to share about how that kind of interfaced with your work with your clients, but also how we as people can apply that to our lives to live more rich, fluid, creative, spontaneous lives.
Oh my goodness, that's a huge question. Um, I'm not really quite sure how to. Can you
Well,
break that up into something
yeah,
smaller?
yeah. So just like the gentleman with the shoulder issue, maybe are there examples you could give of when you saw that shift happen in people you worked with, and was that part of what might have been a shift you noticed with people and working with them when they began to see that they weren't a machine, like the most practical example I can see. I know how many times, I mean, I can think of a half a dozen people that you worked with who I was working with who were about to get surgery and you all of a sudden helped them get in alignment with their midline and begin to unwind these as you said, shift so the body could heal and evolve and do what it needed to do because it was working against itself, which again would be a mechanical. And going to a surgeon is the ultimate of treating yourself like a body, and going, the surgeon's the mechanic. And so you help them experience, whether they were aware of it or not, their body is processed. And maybe that's a better way of talking about it. How often did people get that insight and it changed them, versus it was just a practical thing and they didn't have to get surgery and they were happy about it? But I do, like, I'm thinking of this couple that you worked with for years who were just dear friends as well, and they would, which is funny because the term they would use is, I need to go back to, Sharalee for a tune up, which actually we could say, more get back in touch with the fluid nature of my midline system.
Mm.
But yeah, is it necessary for people to have that insight, or is it more a more that a good, effective therapist has that insight?
Yeah,
Yeah. Soon.
so it can be either or it can be both. And I think a lot depend, well, certainly, although all Rolfers get the same wonderful level of training, each of us bring our own levels of consciousness and backgrounds that inform the work and how it plays out, no matter how closely we adhere to Dr. Rolf's teachings. So certainly it can, the therapists themselves can bring more to the table. But with the client, with the person who's receiving the work, a lot depends on their level of consciousness. And by that, I mean, how much are they aware of themselves? Not, certainly with your work, it would have been their inner world of their psyche. But with Rolfing, it's how aware are they of their own bodies?
Hmm.
And some people, as you know, people have different learning styles: visual, kinesthetic, auditory. Some people remember almost every single word that I say, and I never have to repeat anything. Other people, I have to take them to the mirror and let them see it so they can see where their body is in space and what it's actually doing. And that's the only way that they can process what I'm offering them. Other people who have that more kinesthetic awareness feel phenomenal changes on the table before they even get upright in gravity and start moving. But anyone can develop a greater kinesthetic awareness by just simply doing some movement and being aware of it. And it can be something so simple as paying a lot of attention to how you're walking across the room Or when you go on your daily walk, how am I moving? What do I feel in my body? And pick different areas of the body, pick the body as a whole. They can experience gravity in yoga, for instance, if they do tree pose, where they're balanced on one foot, they're pushing through the ground with that foot that they're standing on. And that then gravity becomes a tool
Mm.
for them to be even taller and more upright. Um, there's so many different explorations that a person can do to increase their kinesthetic awareness and become more in tune with themselves in that way. Did that answer your
Yeah,
question,
no,
Mark?
that was beautiful. That's beautiful. And it gives us a beautiful uh, dovetail into my final question, too. And I know there's going to be a lot of people out there that's are going to be disappointed hearing, if they haven't already, that you've retired because,
Yes.
for over 3 decades, you have been and truly, I mean, people I've talked with, and you had such a amazing reputation, and anybody who wanted to do the deeper work, and not just, and don't get me wrong, there's amazing body workers out there in many different formats, but I think you were the only truly certified Rolfer in our area, and it's been a gift to have you here. So, now that you've retired and people won't be able to actually consult with you personally, and I'm thrilled for you. I know you shared that you and your husband were going to do some traveling, and I just found such an exciting period of time in your life. But those who are listening in our audience that are feeling stirred by our conversation and want to reconnect with their bodies as a living, growing, ever unfolding process, and that they may not have a certified Rolfer near them, what words of encouragement or perhaps suggestions? Is this something that actually, just studying Ida's work, or perhaps, finding a workshop, or are there other ways to get to some of these same truths or similar work? Just any kind of encouragement, somebody on their own path. Maybe they're just beginning and this is sparking an interest in them. How might you encourage them or suggest they move forward?
Ah, well, any kind of movement discipline, and I encourage a variety of movement disciplines, can be very useful. Take a dance class, some kind of a fun dance class that you really truly enjoy. If dance is not your thing, try some sport that's in line with your ability and your age level, and something that feels fun to you. Riding a horse requires you coordinating your movement with the horse. Just be sure you wear a protective helmet.
Yes, for sure. Same with skiing. Oh my goodness. Yes.
So, yoga, Pilates, these require some paying attention to your body as you're doing the movements. These are wonderful explorations. And there is a lovely movement discipline called Feldenkrais. It's
Yes.
named after Moshe Feldenkrais. And he and Dr. Ida Rolf exchanged ideas quite a lot. They were promoting their ideas and teaching them around the same time frame. You can find Feldenkrais practitioners who will work with you virtually. You
Wow.
don't have to be there in person, and unfortunately, there's not one here in Pensacola. If you are willing to, if you have the money and the motivation and the time, and you want to get work from a Rolfing instructor, guess what? You can schedule a 10 series with them, and you can get on a plane and you can fly and go get work from them. Where do you think I get work? I go to the instructors.
That's great.
So you can look on rolf.org, and that's where you can find the faculty if you want the highest level work possible. Anyone who has a Rolf movement certification is going to offer you the incredibly valuable movement work along with the hands-on work. And do not underestimate the value of that. All Rolfers are trained in doing some movement work, but it is vitally important because if you don't teach a person how to use their body differently, they might possibly recreate the very problem that brought them to you as a Rolfer in the first place.
Yes.
So Rolf movement work is quite valuable. There is also a type of exercise called fascial fitness.
Mm.
And there are a few instructors in the US who offer virtual training in fascial fitness. That's another good exploration that a person can do that could help them find a more effective way to use their body and not only stay fit, but stay healthy.
Wonderful. I had not heard of fascial fit. That sounds like a wonderful thing to check out and check into. This has been so wonderful. We've talked about doing this for quite some time, and I'm so glad it worked out for both of us to finally do this. Because I truly had sensed. You sense when somebody carries a wisdom, and it's not just conceptual, but it's embodied. And that to me is the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Is wisdom is knowledge tempered by experience and embodied. And because you truly walk your talk. I mean, literally, just the way you move. And I mean that. And it was such a gift and honor to have a chance to work with you. And I'm so glad I chose to when I did and did not wait till after you retired. And thank you for taking the time to share all of this wisdom with us today. And if there's any last words you want to share or leave us with before we say goodbye today.
Oh, yes. I just want to encourage everyone to keep your eye on the internet because I am actively searching for a Rolfer to take over my practice here. And
Fantastic.
because there are so few of us worldwide, less than 2,000, it's a small pool to pull from. But I haven't given up hope yet. I do hope that someone does take over and carry the work forward here in Pensacola.
Oh, that's
And
very exciting.
yes, so keep your fingers crossed. Maybe call the school and tell them we need somebody here.
Fantastic. And if
Um,
you end up talking with anyone and they need a reference for being here, please put them in touch with me.
Thank you. I will do
Yes.
that
Yeah.
because what a wonderful place we live in. It's just such
Yes.
a well-kept secret.
Yes, it is. And I think that particularly there will be, I mean, goodness, there'll be a huge vacuum without you here.
Oh,
And I know, and I mean that. I genuinely mean that. It's such a unique niche of work that not enough people know about. And I hadn't even thought about that. That could be a possibility. So I very well may give them a call as well, the Institute. So plant another seed. It doesn't hurt, right?
yes. If they got flooded with phone calls, they might take notice.
There you go. Well, I wish you all the best in all of your future endeavors. And again, thank you personally for the work I received and also for today for sharing your wisdom with a wider audience. Sharalee, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Michael. You have touched so many people in so many ways, and I cannot tell you what a privilege this is to be a part of your podcast and what an honor it was to work with you. Thank you for everything.
Oh, you're so welcome. The feeling is mutual. And thank you again. And to the audience out there, thank you so much for being with us for another episode of The Other Side of Things. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for tuning in to The Other Side of Things. I have been your host and guide, Dr. Michael DeMaria. You can find out more about my work at michaeldemaria.com. Explore the books, music, and online programs and films. And we'll see you next time on The Other Side.